Welcome to today's February 26th Ways and Means Subcommittee meeting. Please stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call of the members of the Ways and Means Subcommittee. Councilor Morabito.
Here.
Here. Councilor Powers is absent. Councilor Silvestri.
Here.
Here. Councilor Zambuto.
Here.
Here. Council President Keefe.
Here.
Here. And Chairman Visconti.
Here.
Here. Quorum is present.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to continue the conversation about the new high school.
Okay.
I know there were a number of questions that were raised at the last hearing. We have a team from the city that's prepared to answer some of those questions. And then if we have time, I know we're limited to an hour, but we're happy to answer any of the questions that may come up. I think we were going to start off. I know there were questions about
if you don't mind,
yeah.
what I would have liked to have done is probably started off with some public comments if there was anybody on here, only because last meeting we saved them to the end, and I would prefer to let them speak if there is anybody here to speak on behalf of the school and the budget and all that stuff. Is there any comments from the public first? I don't think you could stand up there because I don't. Oh, go right ahead. Name and address for the record.
Hi, so I'm Lonnie Stevens. I live at 122 Broadway. I'm also an educator in Revere. I work at Revere High School. And in addition, I'm the treasurer on the Cultural Council here. So I cannot comment on the budget. I don't know if anybody else wants to step ahead of me.
Okay.
But
if you have any comments about the new high school.
yeah.
Okay.
So just speaking about the current high school, I mean, there's lots of issues with it structurally. Yeah. When I think about just some grand challenges that we're facing right now, not only in Revere, but just as a country, I'm thinking about climate change, I'm thinking about teacher retention, and then I'm also thinking about learning loss and all these gaps that we see in learning. And I think having a new high school would address all these issues. Not 100% for sure, but they would definitely be working towards mitigating those. So thinking about climate change and just how as we see years go on, we see that the climate is changing. We are seeing higher temperatures earlier on. Now that I'm thinking about this, students are in school in the months of June, September, August. There are times that the high school is 85 degrees, 90 degrees. There's no air conditioning. Okay. So that's one really awful issue, not in just having a school that isn't controlled, the climate isn't controlled is awful, not only for teachers, but for students, for faculty. I'm also thinking about the fact that there's no windows in a lot of these classrooms as well, which has another adverse impact on student learning. Obviously, we've seen a lot of learning loss with COVID in the recent years, and having no windows in classrooms is just exacerbating that. In addition, we've seen a lot of population growth in Revere. I think it's raised about, according to the census, I think it was like 5% in 2020. The current high school cannot fit all the students. There's approximately 2,000 students. 26? 22, 26. In addition, the current high school is really inaccessible to a lot of the students. So where we've seen a lot of this development is along the beach. And so thinking about that, the current high school is extremely far away from that. If it were to be at Wonderland, it would be a lot more accessible to that growing population. And then of course there's teacher retention. So we've seen a lot of, and this is across the country, it's not just in Revere, but we've seen a lot of educators leaving education or also just leaving urban public districts. If we want to keep good teachers, then we also better accommodate them. And currently, we have every single teacher in the high school is sharing a space. I know that the current high school, there would still be sharing of space. However, I would think that it would be more strategically planned. Right now, there's psychology teachers sharing room with math teachers, sharing rooms with biology teachers. Thinking about the equipment and the resources necessary for all those different types of educators is completely different. Also, that being said, there's not a lot of room for collaboration in the current classrooms. They're just not set up for that. And so I'm just standing here today because I went to Revere High School myself. I graduated in 2017. And I really do believe that I got a great education. Granted, I also graduated at a time that COVID was not really a problem. So the current HVAC systems are not suited for the respiratory diseases that we're seeing right now. And also, I wasn't a student in Revere when these school systems were so overcrowded. So I think that my students deserve to have the same opportunities that I did. I was able to move on. I graduated in 3 years, and now I'm back in Revere. And it's because I really do care about Revere. I love Revere. So I understand that the building structure is a part of the accreditation. We need an accredited high school in order to give these students an opportunity and to have them have bright futures. I'm not the only recent graduate here in this room. I know that you all know a lot of recent graduates from Revere High School, and they've moved on to do great things. We're currently not supporting them with this building. I don't think that my kids can't do great things, but having an old high school cannot support them in the way that I was supported. So I don't feel comfortable jeopardizing the risk of the youth. I don't feel comfortable jeopardizing the youth's future and what they can potentially achieve. I can't deny that from my kids.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? I know there's some questions that need to be answered as well, and if we have 5 minutes at the end, I can save some public comment for the end as well if people aren't here. So, Mr. Mayor?
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman. So we know that there were questions about eminent domain. To the best of his ability, Paul Capizzi, city solicitor, will be available to answer some of those questions. I believe Brian Dakin from our project team and Diane may be able to, Dr. Kelly may be able to give some more detail on some project related issues around cost, and then if as questions come up, we're happy to be able to answer them.
Okay, thank you. I believe at last meeting we had some questions that were for both Mr. Dakin, Mr. Viscay, I believe, as well as Solicitor Capizzi. So whoever wants to, I'm sure you have those notes in terms of what those questions were. You want to start off with eminent domain? We can start off with that.
Hi, I'm not sure what your questions are, but I want to begin by stating that the city did pull together the best team available to assist us with the eminent domain taking. Given the size and scope of this parcel, as you're all familiar with, we hired an experienced land use expert, a well-established and reputable appraiser, and one of the state's premier eminent domain attorneys to assist us. You've all heard, I think, an executive session from our land use expert and our appraiser. I have confidence in their analysis and believe that everything we have done up to this point is proper and well-grounded and defendable. Having said that, I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have about it. I don't know how this works, but sure. You there on the right?
Council President Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say a few things, and this is to the council more than to the public. I'm not sure why we're talking about the eminent domain process right now. The city council voted in a supermajority to take the land. We agreed, we were given a price that, that we felt, we understood, and we all voted, we voted in a supermajority. It may even have been unanimous, but I'm not sure if everyone was here. It might have been 9 or 10 votes out of the 11. So supermajority. Why are we talking about this right now? We're talking about building a high school, which we all voted on. We voted to build a new high school. We voted on taking the land. We have appropriated the money to take the land. The only thing we should be talking about is the cost of the high school. And what it seems like is I understand, it's an expensive cost. We should be worried about that. That's something we have to discuss, and how we're going to pay for it, and how we can mitigate those costs, and how we can make sure that we're not overspending, and how we can protect the taxpayers. 1,000%. The eminent domain already happened. To be going backwards shows anyone in this council that says they want to build a new high school is really not speaking the truth. The truth is we want to play politics with it. We want to go backwards. We want to talk about something that has nothing to do with the Ways and Means Subcommittee. We're talking about the cost of the school building. And when you talk about the cost, the inflations were based on cost escalation with labor, cost escalation with materials, not land. As a matter of fact, if you want to talk about escalations, the land values are going down right now. The last 6 months, land value has gone down. So should we project to spend less? No. Okay, we're going to talk about what hypothetically could happen. Hypotheticals, those are great. But we need to be real about what we're talking about. We told the residents of Revere, it's very clear, we need a new high school, 1,000%. If you want to bring it up to everyone in the city, we need a new high school. Anyone that doesn't think we need a new high school in the city needs to get their head checked, okay? That's a fact. Yes, we have to take care and protect the taxpayers, but we also have to take care and protect the 2,000, the 7,000 students that go to our city, and those family members that care about living in Revere, and care about raising their families and putting them in a good school system, and care about the future of the city. Anything else we talk about that, the fake numbers when it comes to what that tax revenue, what that site is, we shouldn't even be talking about that site. If you don't want to build a school, say it now, let's move on, tell everyone here, we don't want to build a school, we want to make sort of mixed speeches on the site and the takings. We're talking about the cost of the school, the escalation cost, the final cost, and how we're going to pay for it. That's all we should be discussing today. I don't know why Mr. Capizzi's here. I don't know why we're even talking about eminent domain takings. That's already passed, already been voted on. So let's just quit the BS and let's talk about the school cost, how we're going to pay for it, what the potential, how we can factor it out over the next 10 to 15 years, and let's get beyond that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Keefe.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Just a point of information, and I appreciate the fact that Councilor Keefe wants to build a high school. I totally understand that. But at the last meeting, didn't you ask Mr. Dakin to show us numbers for,
Absolutely.
For the site that was supposed to be discussed tonight, I thought, right? So actually,
I'm under the assumption
in
that
my
that's gonna
opinion,
be
this
the
is
case.
in play. We're taught, there are many of us up here that want to hear numbers on what the existing location might be. And so, I don't think that any council is up here that may be thinking about that or playing politics. I think they just want to, represent the average taxpayer out there that has to come up with a $480 million price tag. So, in deference to you, Mr. President, you would ask for that information.
Point of information, and this
If-
point of
if we-
information, Mayor, and I
Can
don't
we-
want to take any time, but
Okay.
just to make it also clear, if you go back, and again, I know that not everyone spent the last 3 years in these meetings, and I certainly haven't been to all of them, the cost of building on current site is more than the cost of building that's on paper. It is more than building at Wonderland site. That's a fact. And as a matter of fact, that's also with the hypotheticals, if building on current site, there's so much unknown what's under that ground, where the clean slate
due
was,
respect, Mr.
the clean
Chairman.
All right,
slate,
hold on.
the clean
Hold on.
slate
Can we get this under order?
was less
Thank you.
cost.
All right.
If anyone took the time the clean slate, Wonderland site, cost of construction, and
Counsel.
time of construction
Okay.
is less. That's a
Thank you.
fact.
All right. Okay. Council President, I was in those meetings as well. So, and maybe I didn't attend 100%, but I attended a quite high percentage of them as well. So there's some discrepancy there with that, with those statements. So I asked Solicitor Capizzi to be here. I asked Mr. Dakin to actually come back, I think, to reassess the old site or the existing high school site, because we were thrown with a number of 499, which was a surprise to all of us. Maybe it wasn't a surprise to you, but it was a surprise to me, and I think the majority of the council. So with that being said, I think it would be in our best interest to try to figure out the best and easiest and cheapest way to build a high school. Nobody says that they can't build a high school at the existing site and it's gonna hurt our students. That's not the case. A new school is a new school. And with that being said, I asked them to be here, so to explore that option. With that being said, Councilor Zambuda would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect to my council president, I'm offended by your comments.
What particular? What particularly?
I'm talking through the chair. I'm not talking through you. I respect you when you're up at the chair. I hope you respect the chairman. Okay. One of them is, if you want me to start doing fact checks on you, it was 8 votes out of 10. There was 1 absent at that meeting. So that was your first inaccuracy. And to say that I'm playing politics, if you were referring to me, I'm super offended by that. I'm trying to protect the taxpayers. That's what I was hired for 24 years ago, and that's what I do up here. So I'm offended by your comments. You want to make a speech like that, make it when you're sitting up in the chair, but I think it was inappropriate, and that's my opinion.
Okay.
And
Can we move on? Do you have a question to Mr. Capizzi?
I do.
Okay, let's try it. We have, I would say, what's that? 40 minutes, so let's try to make this as effective as possible.
I'll take no more than 2 minutes here.
37.
Since the solicitor's up here, and since we're talking about eminent domain, even though my colleague doesn't want us to talk about eminent domain.
Come on, let's move forward. Thank you.
Bottom line is, can you guarantee us that the $29.5 million price that we put on the taking is going to be that way when we go to court?
It's a big question. The question is if we go to court, which we're not there yet, but that threat does exist. So I have to err on the side of discretion when answering these questions, but I can't give you any guarantees about anything in the future. I don't have a crystal ball.
Of course not, because when you go to court, especially on eminent domain cases, they normally take one side and then evidence that the other side puts out there to say that their property's worth a lot more than you're saying, and normally they come to a consensus and they split the difference. And I'm willing, and I think I've already bet the mayor that it won't be that number. It won't be that number when we're all said and done. So
Any other questions?
thank you for answering honestly, because I don't think anybody could say anything different.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor McKenna.
Thank you. This is not for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm finished.
All right,
Yeah,
no, I'm not,
I'm sorry.
Can you, I asked you to come up, so I might as well have a question for you. In terms of the eminent domain process, yes, we took the land. I guess the biggest question is, are we in the process of actually, if in fact it wasn't to go in at the Wonderland site, okay, and it went back to the high school, what is the process with the eminent domain site? Are we, is there a possibility of giving selling the land back to the current owner and so forth and so forth and so forth and so on?
Well, the best way I can answer that question is the city conducted a good faith taking.
I
right?
understand,
It turns out
yes.
that if it turns out.
Yes.
The purpose for which we expropriated the property is no longer viable, then the city does have the legal right to dispose of the property.
Okay,
that's a different question, how we dispose of it. And again, because we're under the
Yep.
threat of litigation, I prefer not to talk about what isn't on, which really isn't happening right now.
That's right.
I'm just trying to avoid that,
Okay.
again, err on the side of discretion. I'd rather not say what we will do
And what we can.
can and cannot do, because we're not facing that situation at the moment.
Understandable. Okay. I just, you have a question for Mr. Capizzi? Okay. Okay. Council McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you, I'm so confused. Have we tested the land for contamination? Because we, had 100 years of dogs down there, and we don't know what else was down there when the dogs, dogs have to poop, and where do you put
I
the
have a dog. Yeah,
Where
I
do you
know how
put
they
the
work.
poop, so there was, I mean,
think
you're
that's
talking about billions of dogs down there. Have we tested?
That's a lot of, you know
the-
what?
I think that's a better question from,
Yeah.
Mr.
That is a more
Dakin.
appropriate question for
Do you
Mr.
think, do you
Dakin.
think you know that?
I
Oh,
don't
Mr.
know the
Dakin.
answer to that. Yeah, he can answer that more.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome,
you.
Mr. Dakin.
Brian Dakin, 1 High Street, OPM for the project. We haven't done all the testing we intend to do down there, and part of that is, we've done the testing that the feasibility study can afford, is the honest answer. And we have done some geo-environmental testing and more geotechnical testing to understand that we can really put the building where we think we can put the building from a structural point of view. So from a geotechnical point of view, we've got good news in the last few months. No big changes, no large costs. But part of the design development phase, the next phase of our project at Wonderland, would be more or less gridding out that entire site, test pits, environmental testing. Right now, that's part of the assumptions we're carrying in the project, is assuming that we have to get rid of a certain amount of soil down there. And that testing will vet that number, confirm that number before building.
And that's gonna cost millions of dollars to do, because you have to dispose of it somewhere else. And I know in Monsanto, before they put the Encore, they spent $1 billion to get rid of that contaminated, the dirt. What if it is contaminated and we're talking about, excuse me? What if it is contaminated and we're talking about millions of dollars more?
So the assumptions that the project is making right now is more or less that between 1 and 2 feet of soil is going to end up having to come out of that site, across the whole site. That's where we've set the assumption based on historic data, reviewing work that previous owners did down there, previous DEP files, et cetera. We think that's a good place to be, and we don't expect the site to be anything like the site down at the casino. There's different history, less industrial use, much less industrial use down there. But that is something, that would be one of the first things we do in design development, if we were to proceed down at Wonderland, is to get that testing done. And before the next phase is over, we would know the exact dollar value based on testing, and that would be incorporated into the budget. And we would work our way towards the same number, same total number or less next time. That's a big piece of design development, the next phase, that allows us to really hone in assumptions in these budgets. Right now, we're assuming that there's a whole lot of contaminated soil down there, but not an over-the-top amount that we don't think would be appropriate for the history of that site.
I was going to ask Ms. Kelly, Dr. Kelly about this, but maybe you can answer it while I have you up here, because there's probably people that want to ask you questions, so I don't want you to sit down and stand up all. When is the next evaluation for the school? Certification? 2 years, okay. So 2 years. And if we feel that, what happens?
If we fail the accreditation process,
Yes.
which we will if we are
Definitely.
not actively in a building project, it will have implications. The main implication is for students applying to colleges who won't be, they'll have trouble getting into college if they're coming from an unaccredited high school.
Okay. So that will be on there, that will be known when they...
Yes,
when-
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it
And
gets
the other thing I wanted to ask you while I have you up here is, so you're talking about using the old high school for middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, am I right?
So I'll frame this as, when I, as a superintendent, look down the road and think about what's happening in the district and what our enrollment numbers are at and where they're going, there's a definite need. I think that we've talked for a long time, and this council has been hugely supportive with the new school buildings that the city has built over the last several decades. But we also know that the Hill opened over enrolled, the Paul Revere opened over enrolled, the West Revere opened over enrolled, and that's because our enrollment just keeps growing. We saw a big dip in enrollment during the last couple of COVID years, and I can tell you it's already swinging back up. And we are almost back to the projections that MSBA made for our enrollments back in 2020. So we're back on the trajectory that we would have been had COVID not happened, and there will be need for more educational space as our enrollments continue to increase. That's just a fact, you know, so.
My question is, how many, just roughly, you don't have to give me just an estimate of how many middle schoolers would attend that high school? If we had to put middle schools, if we did a new high school, we had to put middle schoolers in that high school, how many would you say?
So today, we have actually 1,757 middle schoolers. That compares to 2,226 high schoolers. One of the key differences is middle school is 3 grades, whereas high school is 4 grades. So it's automatically a little bit less. The MSBA has projected that in 2025, 2026 school year, middle school numbers will be at 1,934, and our high school numbers will be at 2,359.
So I'm just going to ask you one more question. I'm going to stop because I've been talking too long. But so in your vision, your estimate, when would we see those kids in that school?
If that was to become a central middle school?
Yeah.
I think we're a ways away from that. I think we're a ways away from realizing the high school. And we would have to get beyond that point that the kids were actually moved into a new building. And then there'd be some work that needs to happen on the existing building before it became a central middle school.
This is just a hypothetical question, but could those middle schoolers go into Kenley School?
Into the McKinley building?
Yes.
No. We were at, I think that when I might have this number wrong, so I probably shouldn't guess, but we were around 750 kids at the McKinley when it was overcrowded and we had to build the Hill to accommodate.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Dakin? Mr. Dakin?
If there are no other questions,
I believe we had some questions that,
Correct.
we just started with.
no, I mean new questions.
Mr. Dakin, Brian, you know.
I would,
I thought we had some questions. I know I had, there were some questions that were asked at last meeting. Hopefully, you took notes of them and.
correct.
Okay.
And so the number of things that we talked about going through, one that I think is probably the best use for details tonight is sort of a deeper dive into the current project budget, including a highlight of contingencies. I did mention that as far as escalating getting the existing high school, that would need a little more time to present it tonight. But what I can tell the council is that it's something we've been working on. We've also been working on comparing this budget to the Northeast Metro project budget. High level, as far as tonight goes, I can tell you that the costs for the high school project are in alignment with the Voc project. We're within about $20 a square foot of their cost. Their effective reimbursement rate takes the same drop that our project does, from about 77, 78% down into the low 40s. As I mentioned to the council, that happens on every project. That has varied over the years, though. So folks in this room who have experience with older MSBA projects, who were involved with the council then and those administrations, the deal has gotten a little bit less over the years, mainly because construction costs escalate a lot faster than the cost caps that MSBA puts on projects. So if you go further back in time, the effective reimbursement rate on Revere projects and other communities' effective rate would appear higher. That is, the main mechanism of that is that construction costs increase at a rate much greater than the MSBA cost caps. The other thing to keep in mind is the MSBA did reformulate how they calculate reimbursement in 2001. Generally speaking, since then, projects have had a relatively lesser effective reimbursement rate than they used to as well. So there's a few reasons why that happens, but a project will never achieve its full reimbursement rate. I don't know of one in the industry. There's always costs that are ineligible. So what I can tell you high level and what we're looking at the VOC, and we can go through the details next meeting, because I think we'd have a little more time. We can put up their budget side by side, and I can walk you through what their current budget is. They're about a year and a half ahead of us, and we can show you how the costs equate to each other. I think they're actually strikingly close in a lot of categories. With the existing site, I think, as some folks have noted, a year ago when the project moved ahead with Wonderland, the existing site was a $16 million increase from the Wonderland estimate. That's going to hold, and that gap is going to grow when we finish looking at the numbers and bringing them up to today's cost. A couple of reasons for that are the $499 that I know surprised a lot of people and we weren't happy to see. Those numbers have to come up that we presented last year. We also, to go back to that site, would have to repeat effectively the last year's worth of work that the project's done, which would push the opening of the school out a year, which would push further cost escalation. So we can go through this in detail next week, but what it looks like in our analysis is that going back to that existing site is going to cost you time and is going to exceed the $29.5 million eminent domain taking value. I think it's going to end up 30 to 35 million more when we really look at it. We can go through all those details next week. We can stop and do questions now. What I'd like to do tonight is hand out a breakdown of our current budget and bring people through contingencies, soft costs versus hard costs. I figured that's something that we could get done tonight in the time we have. But we can pause and deal with any questions, or should I just jump into that?
Yeah, I think the one of the questions I have is the unreimbursed compared to the reimbursed MSBA numbers. I thought, in speaking with you as well, that there's a big number at the Wonderland site with the land and so forth and so
Sure.
on. So in comparison to the existing site. So I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, aren't we budgeting more money into the Wonderland site because of the information that we're coming to find out? I don't know
Sure.
if it has to do with the garage. A garage, is there a,
So the
help me
existing.
understand this, garage,
Yep.
is that correct?
The garage would be in play where we left the existing site design to not have to eminent domain residential houses, is that needs a garage as well. So
Which
the same phenomenon that we're looking at in terms of the square footage cost being thrown if you use the garage square footage or not. That's the delta I explained a few at the previous meeting, that if you look at this project through the MSBA lens, it's about a $680 square foot cost. That's because that includes the garage space. If we took the garage space out, it's just math, the budget doesn't change. It's a $900-something square foot project. So we would need a garage at that site. And while we don't have the same assumptions about hazardous soil, we have different underground baggage that, as we estimated it a year ago, exceeded the baggage at Wonderland. The cost to reconfigure that culvert, and it'd have to be done in a phased manner around the school, would be extremely costly. So our previous estimates were showing that even though it's a smaller site at the existing site, you're going to have a similar amount of site work to do there, because we have to reroute that 12-foot pipe going right by the building and through. So I can definitely show you that in better detail when we have a little more time next week. And so this was the site cost that we looked at last time, escalating it up to current value, adding a year to the schedule. Here's what it does to it. But I can say it's going to be significantly more money than the Wonderland plan and the trajectory that we're on now.
Okay. So, did I get one of those spreadsheets or no?
Nope.
I'm sorry. Oh, no.
So as this is sort of getting handed out here, and apologies, I don't have
No good, I can't.
an
see.
11 by 17 printer. We can email this PDF around. But what you're going to be looking at once you see that is a breakdown of the current high school budget, which maps to $478 million.
No, it's four.
So the bottom line value is where we were at last week. The first thing I want to say is we have a meeting with the school building committee Thursday night to go through potential value engineering, cost exercises, see what the building committee would recommend. So by the time we're back here on Monday and we can go through these in more detail, compare them to the vote, compare them to the high school, these numbers should have come down. I think they'll probably come down to the tune of 10 or a little bit more million, because I think they're palatable ideas to achieve that savings. But for tonight, I just wanted to walk through and highlight, when I said something like a month ago, there's 85 million in contingencies, part of what I wanted to do is explain why they're there and why we think they should stay there. So the first number that's labeled A up here is the direct construction trades total, 291.6 million. In this industry, in the building industry, when we estimate, you do an estimate on a set of drawings in today's value. That 291 million represents today's construction value, December specifically, when we finish the estimates. But there's two things that are going on that require a design and pricing contingency and an escalation contingency. This is both standard in the industry and standard in the MSBA projects, but the design and pricing contingency, which we have set at 9% right now, equates to about $26 million. That's because we're looking at a schematic set of drawings. And we have a year and a half before those drawings are flushed out to the point that they're biddable documents. So what we're basically looking at with that number is unknowns in the current design. As the design moves forward, you carry a design and pricing contingency to cover that information that's not yet shown on the drawings. We started this at 10%. We dropped it 1% after discussing with the estimating team because we thought that was appropriate. Second, keep in mind that that A number, 291 million, today's dollars, you got to bring that out to where the midpoint of construction is. For us, Consigli, our CM, their advice is to carry 9%, just happens to be the same number as the design and pricing contingency. That 26 million gets you out to when this job would be bid. And when we talk about the other scenarios and we push the project out, that escalation value, when people like me in my industry say, if you push a project out, it's going to cost you money, it's because we have to account for that time. We have to increase escalation. Anything could happen out there in the market. Could things come down? Sure. But from an estimating point of view and being prudent with the city's money, we have to assume these things are going to happen. Those three numbers in a box, theoretically, by the time we're done designing and bidding this project, the 226 millions have flowed up into the 291 million. That would be your total trade cost at the time we bid it. So are those two $26 million numbers contingencies? Yes, but you need them because when we estimate in today's value. We're estimating on a schematic design set, not a bid set, and we're not building for another year or two. So those three numbers altogether are what your projected cost at purchase of the project would be. Below that, line D is the CM contingency. The CM contingency is included in the project. Right now we have it at 3%. We've seen jobs higher. That is basically a contingency that the contractor carries, namely to be able to hold the schedule in the face of changes, labor shortages, trade issues, et cetera. They can use this money to accelerate the project. They can use this money to resequence the project. It's for surprises on the CM side. Any of that money that doesn't get spent never gets borrowed. There's $10 million in bonds and insurance in this number. Those are all calculated off the hard costs. Those come from our CM. The next line, general conditions, general requirements, 27.4 million. That's more or less the general contractor's cost to build the job. They do all the safety work, they do the fences, they do the ramps, they do the trash, they do the trailers, they do the bathrooms, and they have staffing. So that $27.4 million accounts for all that. Their fee, 2% on this job, right over 8 million, brings your total hard cost, when I say hard cost, I mean construction, to $400 million. We're carrying a 4.7% owner's contingency on that, which is about 16.8 million. That's your fund to hedge against change orders. Surprises during construction, scope changes, issues with the design that require new scope. We wouldn't really recommend going much further below that 4.7. We've inched that number down a little bit as well, but we think that's an appropriate change order contingency to carry. Second half of this page is all soft costs of fees, professional services, et cetera. You can see your $2 million feasibility study agreement, which is basically expended at this point. We are proposing to hit the MSBA cap of 3.5%, the reimbursement cap for OPM fees on this project. There are projects where that's a little bit under. There are certainly projects where that's over. But we believe it can be done at the cap, the reimbursement cap. So that equates to a $12.3 million projection for OPM service fees and 10% on the A&E side, architecture and engineering, all the people that are going to design the job, get the job permitted. That right now is being proposed at the 10% reimbursement cap as well. CM Pre-Con Services, when you see Consigli here, that budget line ultimately will pay for them to be involved with the job until it's, they have a construction site, $516,000. There are $1.3 million that we're carrying in the budget for utility company fees, construction testing services, moving. I mean, mailing's on there because that's the name of the budget, but you know, that's archaic. We will need to move the high school. We'll need to move the staff, all their belongings, any equipment that's coming over. We will need a construction testing service, into a construction testing professional, and there will be utility company back fees to get all the power and utilities in here. Last line is furniture, fixtures, and technology. We're carrying this at $800 a student for furniture and equipment, which we feel is appropriate for a high school. The MSBA caps costs, reimbursement costs at $1,200 per student for both furniture and tech. We think it can be done for $1,200 a student on the tech side. We think it's going to take $1,800 a student on the furniture side to do it. And lastly, you'll see that last green contingency. We're carrying 0.6% on the soft costs for changes, additional services, potentially overruns for furniture and technology, et cetera. Brings you down to the $478 million number. Before I pause, I just wanted to say the numbers in red are the numbers that add up to the plus or minus. Right now, they're about 80 million. When we talked at 499, I was saying 85 million. But the top two numbers would either be incorporated into the construction total or wouldn't be realized by the time we bid the project. So those, the top two 26 millions, within the next year and a half, 2 years, we'll know for sure if that money eventually has to be borrowed. The bottom three red numbers, we'll know for sure how much has to be spent by the end of the project. So any of these numbers in red could be undershot, and over the course of the project, it's not that they'd be returned to the city, it's that they wouldn't have to be borrowed. So apologies for all that detail, but
Okay,
I'll pause for some questions.
sure. Counselor Sereno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Dakin, in all your years that you've been doing this in different high schools, what would you say on average is how much you spend per project in contingencies? So obviously we budget, you know, around 80 million or so, but the hope is that we wouldn't spend that much, or hopefully not even close to that much. But on average, what do you see per project on how much of that contingency budget is spent?
So on the, sort of two different answers to that. One is on the escalation and the design and pricing contingency, the two big ones. Almost every project I've worked on has had to use those values by the time we bid the project. And that's really because there hasn't been a really meaningful recession of construction costs in most of my career. So those numbers, the 26 million and the 26 million, almost every time those need to be there. If somehow the bid climate changes, perhaps those wouldn't be needed this time. The bottom numbers, the CM contingency and the two owners contingencies in green, I've never fully expended them on any project. And in fact, a lot of projects, that's where a handful of millions left at the end of the day. We finished the Bill Ricca Memorial High School audit with 2.7 million left in a contingency that started at 3.5. That would be the equivalent of the hard cost, the change order contingency. So the better we can design a job on the front end and the better we can sign up the right bidders, qualified bidders, there should be less surprises and change orders. We should be able to manage a project with few change orders. So the 10 million in CM contingency, the 16.8 in hard contingency, and the 1.9 in soft contingency, my expectation is that we would never erode all of those values. There would absolutely be money that wouldn't have to be borrowed. We just wouldn't know it till the project's over. We could look at it on the way and see how we're doing. That's certainly something we do on a month-to-month basis, but you don't know, you don't need that money until that building's occupied, and signed off on everything. I hope that answered the question.
Council Rizzo.
I know we're gonna be wrapping up here, so I'm not gonna take too long. You know, this was an hour-long meeting. I'm not sure that I've learned anything tonight that is gonna influence my decision realistically, one way or the other. It was interesting last meeting, and it was a very, very interesting point. Councilor Morabito had actually said, are people upset about the location, or are they upset about the price? And, you know, I would venture to say some of us probably both, maybe some of us only one or the other. I happen to fall into the former. I think that the location is absolutely awful, and you know, it's really, it's starting to get old and discouraging to hear about meetings that, you know, one of us or all of us might not have been at over the last 3 years that's gonna influence a decision. This shouldn't be counselors against counselors here, because someone went to some meetings. I mean, that's great. I mean, I've gone to meetings in the past for new school buildings. That didn't mean that my vote was the only vote that counted when it came to funding it. There's 11 counselors here that have to vote how they feel about the project. And so the location, horrible. And, you know, there's so many reasons, and I'll save some of those comments again for the next meeting. But, and again, based on the conversation we had with our Director of Finance, who was very candid and just doing his job, basically said, unless we take some drastic action with a number of items, we don't have the funding capacity where we're at now. So when you start talking about, you know, let's not talk about the location anymore, I think it goes beyond that. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a location issue for some, but it's how is it not a funding issue for all of us? We had the Director of Finance stand up here and tell us we had to do a number of things. GIC, 113 employees with ARPA funds that are going to be coming due. You know, there's so many different issues that we have to attack in order just to get to the point where we'll be able to afford this. You know, we can sit here and say, I want this all day long. We want a high school. We need a high school for our kids. Our kids are so important. Of course they are. And I think there's some of us on the city council who have made votes in the past that have built schools because we believe in that. But you can't spend money that you don't have. There is a number of other people involved in this decision other than the students and the teachers. There are more people involved. You can drive up and down every street around the city. The people who are actually going to pay for this, those are the people that we have to also consider. We have to consider everybody. It's just not one special group that gets consideration. Everyone else gets set to the side. So I know we've got another, and you know, thankfully we have another 2-hour meeting next week. So I'll reserve a lot of my comments for then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can cut the councilors short, what I'd like to do is have Mr. Viscay come up. We got about 7 minutes, 8 minutes. I know I asked him to fill in the blanks and you know, to try to see how the numbers are going to work, and based on a worst case scenario. So if you can elaborate a little bit on my request, and if I have to, I'm sure you know what it was, the question I asked, I'm sure. Or do you want to?
Don't be so sure, but I'll try to answer the best I can.
I guess, just to refresh your memory, taking out of your long-range financial planning, you know, I guess there was an agreement, there were some options here for revenue and receipts. Taking out some of the obvious, obviously, you know, you in fact said as well that we didn't want to put it on the burden on the taxpayers. So taking out the debt exclusion, taking out the CPA act, as well as the Trash Act. How do you come up with that number to finance and fund that project,
Yeah, sure.
if that's possible?
I'll try my
Not an
best.
easy question, but.
No, but, you know, we are now pretty much kicking off 2024 budget season, and this is typically when we really start to look at last year's closeout. We got 6 years' worth of revenue expenses estimates. I can really start to get some ideas on where we are. We are actually trending towards the good on a lot of our local receipts. Our hotels are thriving. We're almost completely hit our $2.2 million in half a fiscal year. So we're at $1.8 million through 2 quarters. So the interest that we're earning on our money is going well. Growth numbers I'm reviewing with our assessor, and those are coming in favorable. So what I've been doing, what I tried to lay out first was some ideas on how to raise money or cut expenses, almost like a 2,000-foot view of this stuff. And now what I'm trying to do now is place numbers in for fiscal year '24 and do some projections out on cost estimates for expenses, revenues, forecasting. And I got to say, it's getting better each time I refine this plan. So by next Monday's meeting, I won't be here unfortunately, but I'm going to give the mayor some financial recommendations that if we adhere to them, I'm hoping to be able to close this gap on funding the high school and funding the land purchase with a series of financial policies that we have to implement on administration side. Of course, there's some funding of the stabilization account, which I believe we can do over fiscal years to take that blunt out. But like I've said all along, there's about 4 or 5 fiscal years that we need to kind of have some reserves to take that blunt out. And then once we get to about 2030, it looks like we're in pretty good shape. So I'm a little hesitant to come forward and give you a full-blown financial forecast on this, but I am working toward giving the mayor something so that you can have something next week to look at and consider over the next 2 weeks, with the hope that we can come back here on the 27th and take a vote to proceed. But I think we just got to keep in mind that we have to run parallel tracks. It's going to be impossible to have every answer for every what if this happens, what if this happens over the next several years. But working with Brian Dakin, talking about some of the costs that may be able to be saved at the end. Again, we're looking at selling 3 separate bonds fiscal year 27, 28, and 29. Right now, we're at a 5% interest rate risk. I'm looking at some structuring opportunities that we might be able to defer some of that capital cost in the beginning to stretch it out towards the end. So I've said it's going to take a couple months for really to fine-tooth comb all these figures, but I'm a lot more optimistic than I was a couple weeks or months ago. That being said, I still think there's some opportunities for the community to raise some revenues or save some expenses through some legislative action, but I don't think that all has to happen by next week or next month. But I think we have to come up with a financial plan and some kind of resolution that we can all get behind to make this a success. So I hope that answers your question.
I was hoping for some numbers, but we'll wait until next week. No worries. Yeah, it does, but I was actually looking, I mean, I know.
I'll have numbers
I was
for the
actually
mayor.
looking for numbers, but that's, I understand your comments. You know, I guess, knowing that there's a 19, 20, whatever, $22 million liability, I was looking for the numbers that were gonna offset that. But you don't have to, you don't have to give us that now, obviously, and.
I like to have the answers with the questions, but again, I'm working toward getting this so that year in and year out, we have balanced budgets that include the debt service payments for both the site acquisition and the high school. But again, it's a very complicated presentation, and I don't want to give it prematurely. So I really want to have enough time to make sure it's good.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Council Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one I could believe would be for either Dr. Kelly or Mr. Dakin. Is there a point that the MSBA comes back and says, you know what, you can't get us an answer of whether this is moving forward or not, and this is done? Like, you move to the back of the line.
So I don't, no problem. The shortest answer is that none of us can speak for the MSBA. They have been accommodating of the feasibility study in the city as this process has stretched out a bit. They encourage the project to endeavor to try to get to 2 different board meetings with the schematic approval. We're going for either March 1st or the next one, which is going to be April. If we're not going to make either of those with the decision, the city will owe some sort of update to the MSBA to say that we can't make either of those meetings. Here's why, and here's what we're trying to do about it. I really hesitate to speak for MSBA, but I think they're pretty good at working with communities, especially in the economy that we're in, with the construction costs we're all seeing, to try to figure something out. So I don't think using, I think the MSBA would work with the city to make something work. One way or the other is the real answer. But do we have schedules, and are the budgets tied to those schedules? Yes. And
Thank you.
These numbers will move as the schedule moves.
Counselor Keefe.
Thank you,
And then
and
Counselor.
I'll be brief. I know that we're running into the meeting, so I appreciate your latitude. I just want to, this is the second meeting in a row. I didn't comment last meeting that, when someone, not just me, but other people bring up that we have had these meetings for 3 years, and I think we're up to 60-plus meetings, more than that, but that, I get it. Not everyone should or needs to be on these meetings, but let's not discount the ones that do attend these meetings. I mean, you think every other Thursday night at 6:30, I want to be on a Zoom call with, Dr. Dakin? No offense, Mr. Dakin, right? Or left field? But don't discount the fact that we took our time to be part of it. And secondly, we did vote on the taking. So let's not, if you're getting cold feet, that's, I get it. We're not getting, so the taking shouldn't even be discussed. We voted on that. The discussion, hold on, let me just finish my.
You already mentioned that
I know, but that was brought up again.
Okay.
We're talking about why people don't want it.
It's
We
being
already
brought up.
Okay,
It's
so
being
then it's a
you
moot
already
point.
mentioned it.
So then it's a moot
Okay.
point. So
No,
that's
it
a
isn't.
moot point.
Nothing's a moot point.
We're
Everything is
talking
on the
about
table.
when I've never said
Okay.
that I've never said, and no one here actually has ever
Okay.
said we don't care about what the
Counselor,
cost is.
you made your point.
No,
I
so
understand.
I just want to say it again. I care
Great.
about the cost. We're here to discuss the cost,
That is
and how
part
we're
of
going to
the
pay for it.
cost.
So that's the only thing we should be balking about.
Okay, that's
Simple
your
as that.
opinion. That's
All
your
right?
opinion.
You
Thank
can't
you.
just show
Thank
up to
you.
the game. Come to practice too.
You're not talking about me when you come to, okay, so let's relax there, because you're not talking to me, because I've shown up to the
Point
practices.
of personal
So
privilege.
enough.
Can we have?
Counsel Morabito,
Thank you.
all right?
I should be the only one in this chambers raising my voice because I'm on the subcommittee and I have yet to have a word. I have not been called on. Okay, so let's keep everyone's tone down. And the reason I mentioned price versus location last week is because we have already voted on the schematics, okay? The question is, most of the comments were talking about the location. And everyone is concerned about the price. But regardless of if the city is Revere, Saugus, Waltham, Woburn, whatever city you're in, whatever the cost of the high school is, whether we're paying $290 million, $190 million, no matter what city you're in, you're going to have to find a way to pay for it. So the question comes before us, if you want a new high school, how are we going to pay for it? And that question will never change, whether it's today or 10 years down the road. The question is going to be, do we want the cost escalation to keep going higher and higher and higher? Because if we're worrying about how we're going to pay for it now, and we all want a new high school, what are we going to say in 15 years? For those of us who voted for a new high school when it was 15, 20 years ago, how much was that high school, how much was that school then, and how much would it be this day and age? So let's keep these thoughts in mind when we're making decisions and when we're having further discussion. We don't have to go back and forth and yell at each other, and we're all entitled to our opinion, but let's be logical, let's not get irrational, and let's have cost escalation at the forefront of our conversation, because that's what it's going to come down to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me, before we continue, and I think we're going to end this meeting, and I'm going to end it on my note. Let me clarify one thing, okay? That the reason that the eminent domain came back into effect is that I think, personally, it's our responsibility, okay, fiscal responsibility, to put everything on the table, okay, and review back everything on the table. With a $499 million number tag that we were blessed with, let's put it that way, it would be fiscally irresponsible for us not to look at what might be a cheaper venue, okay? I'm sorry, if that's the case, I wasn't notified about a $499 million project, and I was on the team, okay? And I'm on that team. So with that being said, I think it's our responsibility to actually take a look and see if that makes sense. What do we have? Time? I'd rather spend a little bit more time, make sure that we make the right decision than just rushing into something. So that was my recommendation, and that's why I'm asking. So eminent domain, while you may think is off the table, I don't. I think, you know what, because based on that, a $30 million tag, what if it's a $90 million tag? That is always a potential. Nobody in this room can tell me that that is not a possibility. So based on that, okay, when you tack on a $499 million, okay, if you're going to tell me that the original site is more than $90 million, then we have something to talk about. Otherwise, if that's an avenue to save some money, I think it's in our best interest and the residents that we explore that path. That's it. So I'll leave that at long. I'll leave it, and it's not political. There's no politics. This is purely fiscally responsible, to try to be fiscally responsible. That's it. Take politics out of it. Simple numbers. I'll end on that. Thank you.